Hey everyone, this is Steven Shinder Reviews in video form with a non-spoiler review of the King of the Hill revival, aka King of the Hill Season 14. This was a long time coming. I was long anticipated, super excited, and I gotta say, I was really impressed. This is one of the best revivals out there. And before you watch it, I just want to say you do not need to rewatch all of the original King of the Hill in order to understand what's going on in the entire show. There's no late season development that you'll need to remember for the show. Everything you need to know is in the first episode of this season. So everything that you're told there is what you need to know going forward. If you know the characters already, then you're good. And I made a post basically saying this on Threads earlier, apparently liked by the official King of the Hill Threads account. So I'm taking that as an endorsement, and yeah, I am right on this irrefutable fact. Anyway, King of the Hill his new season has 10 episodes. They dropped all at once on Hulu. I kind of would have liked one episode per week. Well, part of me will like that anyway. But on the other hand, having them all released at once, I was just really excited to be able to play the next one after another. I stayed up really late. I think it came out even before midnight, so got through half the show and then the second half this morning. But yeah, I know the weekly release allows people to discuss each episode and all be on the same page. So I guess we're stuck with the drop all at once model for this show, but I'm still really happy with how the episodes came out. The characters evolve naturally. They still feel like themselves, and the world around them has changed, and they've adjusted to the new changes. Now, there's some, I guess you could call it some metaphorical stuff that seems to be going on. The premise is that Hank and Peggy have been living, and this isn't a spoiler because it's already been said ahead of time and like stuff written online about the show's premise. Hank and Peggy have been living in Saudi Arabia for several years. They were living on this station that is basically a simulacrum, is that what you would call it, like a replication of American life or an idealized version of it anyway. So it's basically like when they're living on that station, it's like they're basically in America. And Hank is so used to how he remembers America, the America of when he left, or maybe even further back of the past. And so when he and Peggy return to Texas all these years later, it's a bit of a shock to the system. And I feel like this is a bit of a metaphor for, the original run of King of the Hill had a floating timeline. There were several seasons where Bobby would not really age. He stayed out 13 for most of the seasons. Nobody really aged. Like everything stayed the same. That's basically the station in a nutshell, right? But now, like the audience, Hank and Peggy have to get used to the newness of the new show. And I quite like that. I like that it's not just the same thing over again. Like, what would even be the point of reviving King of the Hill if everyone was just the same? Happy Gilmore 2 came out recently on Netflix, and it was basically a hey, remember this funny line from the first movie? Remember that line? Remember that line? There's even a whole scene where they say all of the lines or give shout outs to all of the characters from the first movie and basically just regurgitating the first movie, and some of the new stuff isn't really all that impactful or heavy enough or meaningful. Whereas in King of the Hill, the revival, whenever there are shout outs to the original show or Easter eggs, I guess you could say, I feel like the references are subtle enough to the point where if there are many of them, like many more than I realize, then they fly under the radar. For someone like me who's seen King of the Hill a bajillion times, so I did not notice too many coming at me frequently. So I feel like they handled any references to any particular moments from the original show pretty subtly and very well, to the point where we're focusing more on the newer stuff here. I even appreciate that there's a moment when, without going into spoilers, there's a moment when um, it's pointed out that something has changed its name due to cultural sensitivity reasons, and the characters basically accept that since that was done out of kindness, then it's a good change. And I quite like that. King of the Hill, the original run, has always been about Hank uh, encountering things that are beyond his own comfort zone, of the stuff he is familiar with, and things in the world would change around him and he'd learn some new things even if he wasn't really all that into them. So it's nice that this show has a respectful attitude toward progressive changes that happen in real life for good reasons. This show reflects today in quite a good way. And yeah, they poke some fun at some little things here and there, but I feel like it's not um punching down so much. The changes, the modern stuff in the show makes a lot of sense, and how the characters would react to them. You have Dale, the conspiracy nut. He, in this modern time, this show takes place in the 2020s. COVID has happened in the past, so you can imagine how Dale is in this new show. And I feel like the characterization for Dale has kind of gone back to basics. I remember in those earlier episodes, very early King of the Hill, he looked like the kind of guy who was maybe unapproachable. Like, you're like, hey, I'm not so sure about this guy. And whereas in mid to later seasons of King of the Hill, he seems like a more friendly, funny guy, and that's well and good. There are some funny jokes with him and those seasons, such a fun character. But it does feel like they've gone back to the roots of the character here. With him being a bit less approachable. But one of the twists being that he was briefly mayor of Arlen in the past, and this is in the opening intro, so it's yeah. Um, and people today are more susceptible to stuff that he would BS, people like him would BS. I mean, think about all the posts you see online today, and people just believe them without doing research, or they accept whatever conforms to their own personal bias. Like, it makes sense that Dale and the people around him would be this way. So yeah, I would also like to say, the late Johnny Hardwick, he passed away during the making of this revival, and so they got Toby Huss to start voicing Dale from that point forward. And I will say that there were a couple episodes where I felt sure which person was doing the voice, and I got it right a few times, but maybe another time or two I wasn't sure. So I feel like with Dale's voice now sounding older, and Toby Huss trying to replicate how Johnny Hardwick's older voice sounded for Dale, and the way of speaking, I feel like they did a good job. Toby did a good job emulating the way that Johnny Hardwick did the Dale voice in these latest episodes. So I feel like going forward, the Dale voice, it's different from how you're used to from the original show, even though it was initially with Johnny Hardwick. But with how the Dale voice is now, I feel like they've got it, and it feels consistent between these episodes within this season. And so, good job, Toby, on uh, doing Johnny's what he did with the voice before passing. Continuing that tradition. Con voice actor is different here. I think they made the right decision by casting an Asian voice actor here. That being said, it is pretty different from what we're used to for Khan. So I do wonder how much searching they did for a new voice for Khan. Like, were there open auditions? Were there a lot of people, or did they basically reach out to their own network or whoever they knew? Um, and maybe Khan's voice in the original run. I'm not a huge expert on this, but maybe the original voice sounded too stereotypical. So it could be a good thing that it's done this way. That sounds different from that original voice. But Khan isn't in as many episodes out of these 10. I can only remember one where he's really prominent, and it is meaningful, and I'm sure we'll see more of his storyline in the next batch of episodes whenever that comes out. I mean, there have been rumblings here and there of what's going on with his storyline. Um, and I guess I'm going character to character. Boomhauer, his way of speaking is still the same, but he's no longer a ladies' man. He has a girlfriend and is kind of like the stepdad to her son, Luke Jr. So I think that adds an interesting dynamic and shows that things have changed, time has passed. His face certainly looks a bit more aged, so it kind of makes you wonder if maybe in the original show, maybe he used some like anti-aging makeup or something to make himself look younger. I don't know, but I like how he's utilized in the new show, the new season. Um, it feels like he has a little bit more of a presence, although I feel like they could still do more with him. There is an episode where it felt like maybe he was going to go a whole episode speaking more slowly than he usually does, and then that actually is not what happens. It's kind of a missed opportunity, but yeah, I have a feeling that there might be more done with Boomhauer as a character as the show goes on. This revival feels more serialized, whereas the original show felt more episodic. Particularly the Bobby's whole storyline, reconnecting with Connie, that is kind of a recurring thing, and we see the evolution of those characters. Bobby, Connie, and Joseph are 21 now. Joseph sounds more like John Redcorn. And on that note, John Redcorn and Nancy, I feel like there are a couple hints of what their deal is, but they leave it kind of vague enough. And I kind of wish it'd been explored more in these episodes, but maybe they have more planned for the next batch of episodes. So I guess we'll see what happens. Um, I get the sense that Dale and Joseph do not know the truth of where Joseph came from, but there are a couple hints that perhaps Bobby already knows, and that was sort of an inconsistent thing in the original series. I think in a very early episode, it seems clear that Bobby knows, and then a season or two or something later, it seems like he doesn't know based on something he says. And then in a later season, in one of the first few, maybe mid season, and one of the middle seasons, they kind of play around with this. I feel when Nancy lists the people who know about her and John Redcorn, what their past affair together, and one of the people she lists is like, and possibly Bobby, and so they kind of make a little joke about that in the original run. But yeah, I'm hoping for more exploration of the whole red corn gribble thing of it all for the next batch of episodes. It feels like they are teasing more that could happen with Joseph and John Redcorn in future episodes. Um, I am a little bit I don't know if disappointed is the right word, but I kind of expected that this would happen, that they do not acknowledge John Redcorn's new family from one of the later season episodes, when he reconnects with Candy and she has a son and a daughter, and the daughter is John Redcorn's daughter. Um, they don't really get mentioned at all in this season, and I I wouldn't be surprised if Mike Judge and co just want to ignore that episode as fascinating as it is. I feel like they're probably gonna not mention certain things from the later seasons. And I guess you could headcanon that since the daughter is an adult, she maybe went to college somewhere far away, and maybe John Redcorn and Candy broke it off at some point. Like, I don't know, but it'll probably never be explained, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I want to see more of the Redcorn Gribble of it all in future episodes. Um, Bill seems to be more of the same, which is a bit upsetting. Like he's still somewhat alone and lacks self awareness, and he's very cringe. It's very frustrating that they couldn't find something better to do to evolve Bill as a character. I would like to say that I hope that that's something that gets fixed in the future, but I, at this point, don't really think they will try to fix that. Um, it feels like he's just the punching bag. He'll always be the joke and just remain stagnant, which is really frustrating. Keith David is now part of the cast. He plays Brian, who was a tenant at the Hill residence while they were away, and now he's part of the gang, hanging out with the guys in the alley. He does not appear in these episodes as much as I was hoping and expecting. It's like you got someone like Keith David who is so talented. He's funny, he has a great voice. Why wouldn't you utilize him more? So I'm hoping that maybe the episodes in the next batch have more for him to do. And I also want him to feel more like a character who could hold his own episode. He could have his own storyline at some point. Because, yeah, like you add this character and Keith David's voicing him, like you got to do more with him. He's like Keith David's great. He's even a singer. You could have him, I don't know, do karaoke with Con or something. Um, let's see. GH does appear, and maybe not how you'd expect, but if you think about how young people are today sometimes, then you'll have a good idea of how he is, and it's interesting. It's quite something to see. Lucky and Luann and Gracie's absence is not addressed in these episodes. I'm hoping that, well, I expect that it will be explained in future episodes where they are, because I could have sworn there's some article or something where they said that it would be explained. And yeah, with maybe they want to have GH this season or this batch of episodes for an episode, and maybe next batch of episodes will get an update on Gracie. I think it'd be kind of interesting if Gracie gets sent to live with the Hills for a little bit while Lucky and Luann are off doing some helpful work overseas or something. And I don't know how much they would age Gracie. Supposedly 8 years passed between the end of the original series and this new season, but that's not exactly one to one with the characters, especially when it comes to GH. It's kind of weird there. They don't really mention the ages of the parent characters. I imagine we're supposed to think that they're 50 or in their 50s, given that the ages that were set in the original show would be kind of different, but would be generally like early 40s or something. So, yeah, there's that. Um, let's see, have I missed anyone? I really love, again, going back to Joseph, I love how Joseph feels very much like Dale's son. They've continued that sort of thing. Um, but yeah, I really like how this show doesn't punch down on embracing change and evolving into better people. It's just I don't know if you're against that, then I don't know what to tell you. Like seek help or something. I don't know. Peggy feels a bit more conceited than in the original series, which is kind of unfortunate. But she does have funny lines here and there. Um, yeah, I can't believe I didn't talk about Peggy all that much until like toward the end, but yeah, so this revival, if I had to give it a rating, I guess I would give it 9 out of 10. There's a lot that I love about it. I'm super invested in these characters and these storylines, particularly what's going on with Bobby and, his career as a chef, that just feels right for the character, but he's also figuring out stuff with his love life. Um, and yeah, I don't mind that it's the same voice actress playing him. That is Bobby's voice, and it does sound slightly different enough to where you're like, okay, this is supposed to be older Bobby. Like maybe for some people they want him to sound even more different, but I don't know, this feels like Bobby to me, and I like these moments where we see him and his friends, hanging out at the apartment and just having fun, people watching from the balcony. Yeah, I'm super invested in this revival. I'm so happy with it. I'm so sad we have to wait so long now for more new episodes, but uh yeah, I'm yeah, I want to see what happens next. And I don't know if it's been addressed yet what they're going to do now that Jonathan Joss is unfortunately no longer with us. But I'm sure, they'll figure things out. It's really sad losing these people. But yeah, King of the Hill, it's back. It feels how it should be. It's not just the same shit over again. It has changed enough. It feels very now, but these are still the characters. This is still them. No need to uh, trash this from the canon or whatever, if you can even call it a canon. It's great. It's fun. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. This is Steven Shinder Reviews in video form, and I'll see you all soon.
King of the hill, 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 king of the hill. King of the hill, king of the hill, king of the hill, king of the hill. King of the hill, 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 king of the hill.